Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. I give you a lot of things that are going on in the 2A community. What I see in the news, we're still going through some court cases, mostly with Washington. There's one in Washington about magazine bans. Looks like there may be some hope for some of you guys stuck behind that blue iron curtain. California, again, proves that they're communist. A ruling came out basically saying that assault weapons bans have precedent based on the technology involved, and that they're using the fact that mass shootings are a new thing, which they're not. They've been around for a while now, and they're trying to use that as a means to go after the 2A, which doesn't look good for the home team, but also there's case precedent that's on our side. That's the bad news. That's pretty much what I saw that was kind of like, whatever. In the verbiage of the legal stuff that we end up having to cover, because we watch the stuff on the 2A to keep you informed, to keep us, tactical, especially in New Mexico. I wanted to say my sincerest condolences to the New Mexico State PD officer who was killed. Anyone who lives in the Southwest knows there's kind of an unwritten rule. If you see someone on the side of the road, especially living in the rural parts of New Mexico, you kind of pull over and just check on them because, bad stuff happens here. Weather, you can be out on a road for a long time. And that's what this officer did around Tucumcari, is he pulled up beside someone and asked them if they needed a ride, and he was shot. The very last words he uttered was trying to offer someone some help. And instead, a man pulled a gun and killed him. Stay strapped or get clapped. What was interesting is over the weekend, for that whole search for this suspect, they did capture him, by the way, in Albuquerque, which isn't surprising. What's surprising is he's still alive, to be honest. But it raises that weird question of what would you do if you were in, a restaurant, and you managed to lock guys with a guy, and you were pretty sure that was the guy, but you didn't do anything, but he saw it as a threat. Would you be able to answer and reply if he decided to pull a gun? That's something that I thought about during this whole little thing over the weekend. But the absolute coolest thing I saw is, if you don't follow Ian from Forgotten Weapons and check out what he does, he gives a great history lesson on firearms and the technology that as it's evolved throughout the centuries. And it's interesting that very rarely do you see a gun that is from a movie or a game that is being manufactured, instead of them taking a gun that was already manufactured in our world and modified to be used in the Star Wars world or a video game. Case in point, if you look at the blaster, I think it's the E11 or something like that from Star Wars. It's the one stormtroopers are most known to be carrying. It's a Sterling submachine gun. Sterling M6, I think is what it's called, or MK6, Mark 6. It's basically a derivative of a Sten Bren gun, or a Sten gun machine gun, submachine gun, sorry. I don't know why the hell I said that. But a Sten submachine gun, it's just a modernized version of it. But with Ian, he was showing off in a couple videos now. I think it's the M90 CAW, CAW, from Halo. A shotgun that someone has prototyped in the real world and made a 12-gauge version of the 8-gauge version that was actually made in Halo. Now, why is that cool? Well, because there's some actual practicality that Ian covers with this. Instead of being a shotgun that has the tube on the bottom where you're loading it from the bottom, if you think about the Halo mythos, if you played the video game or you're a big fan of Halo, you know that you're wearing body armor, okay? Well, really, really advanced body armor and armored gloves, the whole bit. It would make sense to have something that loaded from the top. And the video game shows this. And someone being inspired by a video game, instead of taking something and modifying it from the real world to make it into a video game gun, he actually did the reverse. He took a real gun and started prototyping what was actually made in the video game world. And he came up with a very close approximation, if not the same damn gun in real life. Now, he started with a base. He uses an 870 Wingmaster shotgun, left-handed ejection. And the reason why he did that is so that it would eject out of the right side when it's upside down. He turned the receiver upside down. And then he modified how you work the pump action itself to work around the barrel. And he made it very much look like the video game gun. He used some off-the-shelf pieces. So he's using Magpul furniture for the pistol grip and for the stock itself. And he's using an AR-15 buffer tube. And he made a block to basically house most of the parts that are going into the gun that would make it function while it's upside down, basically. Now, what's interesting is Ian covers why you wouldn't have a tube-fed shotgun that was where you loaded from the top normally. If you look at what shotguns are used for hunting, mostly hunting, right? Or close quarter type stuff. There's a reason why shotguns don't have sights. It's because they're kind of an area effect weapon. And what I mean by that is in the air. If you're shooting at a moving target, you want to get as close to line of sight where you're going to put that shot pattern in that area so that you can intercept your target. Now, when you have something that is reverse, so upside down, so you have a magazine on top instead of being below the barrel, what you actually have is the same problem we have with AR-15s and Kalashnikovs. You have a sighting offset problem. So is that a problem if you're hunting game? Slightly more than if you were hunting or like having to do a house clearing drill, or if you're competing, because you can compensate for that in those shorter ranges a heck of a lot easier than you could if you were actually shooting at game at 40 or 50 yards. What you would notice is that spread would be off an order of magnitude to where you'd miss your target. But in the closer areas, what happens is that line of sight kind of lines up a little bit, and you'll just be off center or off from it about an inch or two. Excuse me, from where you would hit or pattern with your shotgun. With three guns and 3-gun matches, and for your average everyday shooter who's just looking at having something cool, something different, something unique, this makes sense. So he has a contest going on, where if you buy a Halo collectible from his website or whatever it is, you can actually enter to win one of these M90A shotguns. But what was more interesting to me is the fact that this is a prototype and this guy is manufacturing these to try to get out to people like you and I. Now, why is that an important thing? Well, I don't know very many people that are in the 2A that don't have some aficionado parts of us that actually like video games or don't like video games. So we kind of like video games, and our kids do, and it's kind of a way to bond with our kids or the younger generations, because if you play something like Call of Duty or any of the Call of Duty series, we have those conversations. So I've had those conversations with my kids. That's what I'm basing this off of. Where they come to me and they go, "Dad, what's this thing do?" And you look at it and you go, "Oh, well, that's this gun from the military of this branch of service in this one country." Or, hey, it's something we have. It's a special forces item only. Here's what it's designed to do, and this is what it's meant to do, and that's why that operator's a little different. But for the first time ever, a game that I know of, a game concept, one that is totally based not in reality, because if you know the Halo series, what it's about is an alien war, or humans advance enough to have an alien war later in our lifetime. And they have certain weapons that they use because of the threats that they fight with the aliens. But there's some practicality for what he was showing. What Ian showed with the M90A, the CAW, is it would actually make a very good close quarter combat shotgun. Number one, we know about sight offset already. We already account for that. If you're using an M4 or using an AR-15 of any kind, and you have optics on it, you already are accounting for that offset. So what that means is that your sight is physically higher than the axis of the bore, so that at really close quarters, you're going to have to aim lower to adjust for that difference. Meaning that if you want the bullet to intersect where it should hit, you have to aim a little lower to make sure that the barrel is actually in line and to hit that target. Now, why does that matter with a shotgun specifically? Not as much, but it makes sense for close quarters, because in close quarters, you're expecting shotguns. You still have to aim a shotgun in close quarters. But the correction that you would have is not as bad as if you're hunting game. So the practicalities of this are, if you're under stress and you're loading from the top instead of the bottom, you can actually watch the rounds as you're loading them. So you're kind of in your workspace and you're able to load your rounds and see them go in correctly without fumbling them as much, especially under stress or duress. The other thing is that you actually get to see the status of the magazine itself, the tube itself. You can see the dot. Mine's a red dot or an orange dot follower for my magazine tube in my shotgun, so I can see it come up when I know I'm running empty. Now that doesn't seem like a big deal, but if you're using shotguns in a 3-gun match or you're using them to defend yourself and it actually gets to that point, this makes a lot of sense, because you'd be able to, unlike the AR-15 where the bolt stays back and you feel the gun actually stop and you know to reload the weapon, or the AK, this is one of the downfalls of the AK, is if you don't know or are not very well versed in the Kalashnikov, you don't know when it's empty. The bolt does not stay back. There's no way that you can tell the gun is empty until you raise the gun up and you get the click and no bang. Okay. Now, when I say if you've trained a lot with Kalashnikovs, you kind of know, because you feel the weight of the gun. It's getting lighter, and before you ever get to that point, you're probably already getting ready to reload it anyway. Okay. But with an AR-15 and a modern sporting rifle, one designed for tournaments or designed for whatever, doesn't really matter as far as I'm concerned. The government cares. I don't. It gives you those telltale signs that you're out of ammunition and you need to top off your magazine. Well, with the shotgun, with being able to load on top, that's exactly what I'm talking about. There's something to be said about that. Now, what I noticed about this prototype is that there's a linkage of how the trigger actually works to trip the sear to make the gun go off. Now, if you know anything about how firearms work and physics work in general, the longer you make one of those linkages, case in point, like the Steyr AUG, the Tavor, when you have to make something longer with a linkage to actually trip the sear to cause the hammer to fall, what you're creating is a really crappy trigger. And that's a function of mechanics and physics. There's no free lunch in physics. There never is. So how they get around this with the M90A is since the shotgun that they're basing it off of is basically upside down, is they have a series of 3 linkages. The trigger is part of a linkage. There's a bar, a transfer bar that has a lever and a wedge. That wedge then pushes the sear trip basically backwards, which causes the gun to go off. And it's spring-loaded, so it'll all reset itself each time. But that stuff adds latency, adds complexity to a very simple design already. You know, the 870's been around for a long time. The Mossberg 500 has been around for a long time. There's a reason for that. They've always worked. And as simple as they are, that is something that you can bank on. So it's great. It's a great idea to see a prototype based on something that is so simple. They just added some more complexity to make it look like the video game gun. For most of my friends, I don't think they would care because it looks just like the video game gun. And that's kind of a big selling point. As it's a prototype, I don't expect a lot of them to be built because it's kind of a niche market. And I expect them to be expensive because you can't get something that is designed to look after something like you would see in a video game or a movie, exactly like it, without there being a cost premium. You know, if you look at the John Wick guns from Terran Tactical, you'll see some of that in real life. You know, they'll take a Glock 19 or a Glock 34, turning it into a Pit Viper, and now you have a $2,000 pistol. You could do the same thing with your Glock 19 or Glock 34 if you buy the parts and pieces and have the milling done to make it look the same. So it's half dozen one, dozen the other if you're really married to having that. Now, what I would look at is the practicalities of it. Now, I actually see a use case for the M90. If you were doing nothing but house clearing drills, if this was your service shotgun for like a patrol rifle or patrol shotgun, if you could get parts consistently for it, I could see a use case for it. But as it's a one-off, I don't see a use case for it. Because as you use something like this, there's going to be wear on the weapon. And you need to be able to replace pieces parts. And until this gets a little more refined, I would say it's just a cool looking toy. You know, unlike the Pit Viper, if you actually look at the practicalities of what they've done to make the Pit Viper a Pit Viper, they turned it into a race gun is all they did. The modifications they put on it are for a good reason. Where the ones for the M90 CAW are more so for aesthetics, not for real life use. You know, John Wick's AR-15 uses in John Wick 2. I've built a clone of it as close as I could. Other than I don't like key mods, so mine is M-Lock. It's a pretty good close approximation to John Wick's gun. The internal parts, some of them are a little tricked out more than his. Some of them are a little less tricked out than his. But all of them are to improve functionality. And that's one cool thing about having modular gun designs. And for the M90 CAW, the prototype at least, it's not very modular. It's more so for the look and feel of the Halo experience. There's something to be said, though, about cool guns. That's all I have for you tonight. I looked really hard to figure out something to try to bring to you tonight for tomorrow, because I always drop them the night before. And this was the best I could do. There's not a lot going on in the 2A. There's a lot of cases still going on. I'll update you with those cases if there's something good or bad that we really need to pay attention to. But right now, they're kind of all in that state of limbo. They're all in that place where they're going to be appealed, and there's going to be multiple iterations of that court fight. There's nothing that we need to worry about too bad other than to remind your reps that, hey, us 2A people matter, especially in an election season or an election year. Like, share, subscribe. Most importantly, be great.